Good morning, Chris, and welcome to everybody who's joined us this morning on our latest LawTech webinar. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing incredibly well. How are you, Martin?
I'm also very well, thank you. I think we'll get straight into this morning. We've got a really exciting hour planned ahead. I think just as usual, we've probably got a core number of people who join us on a regular basis. This is our fourth LawTech webinar since we began our lockdown. I think that probably helpful for me to do just a sort of a very quick intro to me. My name is Martin Boyle. I'm a director at CodeBase. CodeBase is a tech community which is based in Edinburgh. We work very closely with Barclays in particular, Barclays Ventures and the Eagle Lab on this LawTech program that we're running at the moment. Chris, maybe say hello and a bit about you.
Sure. Morning. I am Chris Grant. I am LawTech Director in Barclays Ventures. So, of course, very much involved with the Notting Hill Gate Eagle Lab, where LawTech is based. It's where our home is for the time being. And also looking after the broader LawTech strategy across the bank. So working really closely with CodeBase, as we have been for a long time now, and certainly doing these virtual calls as we've been running for a long time through this COVID now, it feels like. Just to remind, and we talk about this every single time, but this is just a conversation. It is intended to help you with your own independent research, and none of what we talk about here are recommendations or advice for what you should be doing. Your business is very unique, and you'd need to think about how anything that we talk about may or may not be relevant to it. So please bear that in mind as we run through everything that we talk about today. Martin, back to you.
Super, thanks, Chris. So good morning, James, and welcome.
Hi, Martin, how are you?
Great, thank you. So, James, I'll just give you a wee bit of an introduction in terms of what you do. You're the head of legal and company secretary, VP legal at Monzo. Just for everybody's benefit, James is going to do a presentation on LawTech from the consumer's perspective today, from his own perspective, rather than represent the views that are those of Monzo. So, I hope everybody's able to see the poll. I think it's up and live just now. If you're on VVox right away, what you'll be able to do is to tell us where it is that you are from and the sort of industry that you work in. If everybody could click through to that just now, we can get a bit of a better idea as to where our audience is joining us from. Just while we're going through the poll, James, maybe just tell us a little bit about you, where you've been, how you got to Monzo, that sort of stuff.
Yep, sure. So I've been at Monzo since the beginning of 2019. So I guess I've got a bit of an unusual career path for a lawyer. So I'm just over 20 years qualified. I originally worked in private practice as a litigator, sort of did quite a lot of IP work, and I moved in-house in the early noughties for about 7 years, and I was in telecoms initially. Then I moved into financial services. I moved into a business role in a fund administration business as a director, and I became the MD of that business at the end of 2008. And I kind of worked through the financial crisis in that business, helped sell it for the shareholder, and became general counsel for the parent company, which was a company called Valad Europe. It was a real estate investment manager. So I was European GC for 5 years. I did an exec MBA while I was doing that. And at the end of the 5 years, I put myself forward to be the COO of that business. So I was European COO of that business under a new parent company at the time. And then I worked through that role to the early 2018. Decided I wanted to do something completely different, and then I moved into fintech. Initially worked in a fintech called Funderbeam, which is an Estonian crowdfunding platform, disrupting the existing providers by providing at the time they were providing a secondary platform using blockchain technology. And I saw the job advertised for Monzo on LinkedIn at the end of 2018, put myself forward for that, and ended up there at the beginning of 2019.
Wow. I didn't know that LinkedIn job adverts worked. I must note that down.
Absolutely does, yeah.
So before we get stuck into your presentation, James, I wonder, Chrissy, if you would be able just to show up on the screen where our audience has come from. So the majority of our audience is coming from a tech or a startup company, closely followed by lawyers and people who are working in a LawTech startup. So a nice mix, actually. I think actually, if you add together the lawyers in-house and the lawyers in a law firm, it's probably a close second to people who are working in a tech startup and a company. So that gives you a bit of a flavor, James, as to where the audience has come from, and it'll certainly help us in our conversation later. So, James, I think without much further ado, it would be great to hear from you. So I'm really interested to hear this from a consumer's perspective. I think that what we've heard over the course of our webinars is lots of different perspectives on LawTech adoption. So over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much. So I thought I'd kick off with this this diagram. So this is a diagram that comes from some research that Gartner did in 2019. I think this really sets the scene for why LawTech at all. So this visual is really just demonstrating how a typical legal function spends its time, and you'll see that it's typically spending a lot of 50% of their time in the low risk, low value work, which means that they're not able to spend their time focusing on the high value, the high risk at the top right quadrant, or even just the high risk or the high value work. The work that's being done in that bottom left quadrant is typically it's low value, low risk, but it's also typically business as usual and reactive work, and that work needs to get done. It's not as though we can just kind of forget about that work and just move on to the top right quadrant. We need to find a solution for that bottom left quadrant, but ultimately it's not necessarily the most efficient to have the people, the legal team focused on that type of work. I think also if the functions that end up being trapped in that bottom left quadrant are typically being a service provider to the business, they're being a helpline. Yeah, they're solving problems, but perhaps they're not doing it in the most efficient, effective way, rather than being a more kind of value-adding business partner to the business. So that's really my take on why legal tech. I pulled this from Monzo's legal target operating model, and this really just kind of sets the scene for, I guess, how we see the role of technology within legal function at Monzo. And I think the key piece I want to pull out here is that technology is an enabler, it's a supporter. It's not technology for technology's sake. So when we're talking about legal tech, like I like to talk about systems and processes first and people, and then look at how technology can underpin those things and make those things better. So when I look at technology and systems and processes, the goal here is about reducing low value, low risk work. It's enabling the team to focus on the most strategic and valuable work, and then effectively enable the team to move up the value chain, which makes the team within the business perceived as a business partner, not a service provider. So this is the legal tech stack that we're currently using at Monzo. So there are a few pillars here. The pillar on the far right is kind of enterprise wide, if you like. So we use G Suite, we use Slack as our general communication tool across the business. We're using Looker for displaying dashboards, pulling data from different sources, and Notion for our intranet, and Airtable for a database. We actually, within the legal team, we actually use Looker. So we've got some Looker dashboards, which is pulling data from different sources, demonstrating things like how we're spending time on different activities. We've also recently built a dashboard in terms of litigation. So visually, you can then demonstrate what litigation's coming in, the value, frequency, what type of claims they are, which is very powerful when you're talking to the business. The board, the exec are used to looking at like visual representations of data. Legal have historically not been so good at that. So that, for us, that's been a really good step forward. The piece in the third column, Orbis, OneTrust, and DocuSign. Orbis is a due diligence platform. So we use that when we're due diligencing potential suppliers and third parties. OneTrust is a document management platform. DocuSign, I think everybody knows what that is. On the CoSec side, we're using Diligent Entities, which used to be Blueprint, and Diligent Boards. And then on the pure legal side, if you like, we're using PLC for our know-how and templates. We're using Apereo for cost management, and a platform called Tabled for workflow matter management. Primarily, we're using it for contracts, although it can be used much broader than that.
Sorry, James, do you mind if I ask you a quick question before you carry on with regard to the dashboards? So one of the things we heard from Joy Udom last week at Twilio was that they did something similar at Twilio, which they built a dashboard which really helped their business in terms of her focuses on the commercial part of the business. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that dashboard and the link that you have to the C-suite at Monzo in terms of enabling them to understand better the work that you're doing from a law perspective. I think that's one of the things that came out really clearly in the conversation last week is people were really fascinated in the fact that a legal team can have a dashboard and KPIs built around that dashboard, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely it's been a journey. It's not just been there overnight. And actually, to be successful in building dashboards, you need engineering support from the business. And unfortunately, engineers tend to be pulled in other directions, and legal seems to for understandable reasons, it's probably last in line when we get engineering support. But we've been really lucky that as we've started to look at things like risk appetite statements and key risk indicators, that's actually driven us to be more data driven as a legal function, because actually that information is passed upstream to C-suite and the board. And so in order to be able to have that data that we can show the board, we need someone to actually enable us to present that. And so we've been able to pull in some engineering support to get that data. Initially it's early days, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. But even just when you're pulling together a presentation, just like visually, just to be able to pull out, copy those dashboards and copy them into a board pack or some kind of presentation is super powerful. Yeah. But it's not something that lawyers are typically going to be able to do by themselves. I certainly couldn't have done it without the engineering support.
I think that's interesting about presenting your law team's data in the same way that the C-suite are used to seeing data on other parts of the business. That must be very powerful in terms of being able to influence that change in your organization.
Yeah, it really is. I think when you look at things like goals, for example, like legal, when they're trying to come up with goals for what they're trying to do over a quarter, half year, or a year, often goals are not measurable because we think in qualitative terms rather than quantitative terms. But actually, the business thinks very much in quantitative terms, and they want to see a measurable goal. And sometimes when you're in a legal function, you're trying to sort of force that. So to try and kind of extract data which you can then actually show is a measurable outcome, I think is super powerful, and something that the rest of the business just takes for granted, frankly. Yeah.
Sorry, I derailed you slightly there. I think that's one of the points that I was saying at the beginning, that when we think of stuff that we've heard from the rest of our audience, it's helpful to go into a little bit of detail. So thank you for that, and I'll let you get back to the rest of your presentation.
All right, and really just on this slide, all I was going to say is that one of the key requirements for us in Monzo is about having transparency. So we work in a very transparent way. I know many of you probably used to working with Slack and the transparency that brings, and that's a really important requirement for us from a tech perspective. So like when I think about buying tech, like one of the worst things I think you could do is buy some tech which sits kind of like separate to the business. Actually, it's either got to be attached to the business, visible to the business, or it's got to be the front door to that system needs to be like frictionless. So, for example, with Table, the solution that we built there, a key requirement for us was that the front door to that had to be an API in Slack. So, from a client perspective, internal client perspective, they access that platform as does the legal team, but they access it through Slack, and that's something that I think is something that we would look for in all other solutions.
James, sorry, I'm going to interrupt now. My turn just to chip in a little bit there, but does that mean that you're therefore creating a pipeline and you've got a funnel that feeds all the legal requirements that come in or the legal requests that come into the function?
Sadly, not yet, but we could have that from if we wanted. Table does provide that solution, yeah. But we're using it at the moment for contracts. I think to shift the way that the whole of the business interacts with the legal function and to get them to funnel requests in that way would be a really monumental challenge. Frankly, I know that other tech companies have managed to succeed, and I do think it's certainly a goal. Longer, yeah. But it's a longer term goal for sure.
Yeah, because I think it goes back to that transparency piece, and you being able to really clearly articulate and map out what activities are happening within the legal function becomes a powerful piece. But I agree, it's a mammoth challenge.
It is, because actually, what's the task, right? Is a task look at this contract or help on this massive transaction, or is it can you just this really quick question? And I think that's what I've really struggled with. What is a matter? If you're looking at matter management, what is a matter? Is it every question? And to force the business to kind of funnel every single question through that system, I think that's a massive change. And when obviously this deck is talking about that change, but the change isn't just within the legal team. The change is the business as well.
I agree. Nick, I'll let you tell us about the dream.
Okay, the dream. So when Martin asked me to do this presentation, I posted on our disruptive GC network Slack workspace input from the network's members as to what their thoughts were around legal tech, like what works, what doesn't work, what are they looking for, and this was a great answer from someone I know very well, which I really liked, because for a few reasons really. Partly because it's actually technology neutral. So the answer wasn't, I would really like a legal matter management platform, or I would really like a contract AI review system. It was actually looking at what the value that's added from whatever solution, sort of solution agnostic, if you like, much more focused on the outcome and the value it provides. So when I look at this, I think really the dream is some kind of AI machine learning tool, which also then creates workflow, matter management, and ticketing, and that like picking up on the previous point we've been discussing, it needs to be frictionless from the internal client's perspective. There mustn't be an expectation that the business needs to adopt something new. There needs to be the same front door, in this case Slack, but the kind of what sits behind that is super efficient. So you effectively get an automated answer, and if the automated answer isn't available, then it goes to the legal team. And I think it definitely is the dream, and I think a lot of us have that dream, but I think it's also potentially a reality. The reality today, though, is perhaps somewhat different. So the first quote is something that I was quoted as saying in a press article, and the second, I can't say that was attributed to me, that was someone else. And I think the reality is that we've got lots of disparate solutions that only solve part of a problem, and they're typically not joined up. I don't want to say they're never joined up, but typically they're not joined up. It's a very piecemeal approach to solving legal problems. And then I think that kind of on the second point, without being like super negative, but with the people on the call, like sometimes it does feel that you're being sold out without necessarily understanding the problems that without the salesperson really understanding the problems that you're trying to solve, and that can be end up being quite reactive. So you end up being reactive to who approaches you and who knocks on the door, rather than you kind of owning the problem and going out and looking at what solutions are out there. And this is the reality, right? So this is pulled again from our legal target operating model, looking at the different solutions that we might have within the legal team at Monzo, and there are eight different solutions, and you can probably put them in 4 different buckets. So there is an kind of extraction type bucket like e-discovery, or some kind of AI tool. You've got document automation, workflow matter management, and then what I call expert systems. So expert systems are things that focus on a very, very specific areas, whether it's knowledge management, e-signature, like cost management, etc. But the key point I really want to get across is that, like, if you're sitting in a legal function, I need 8 solutions, like, to answer my problem. I just want a solution that answers all my problems, and maybe that is the dream, and maybe the dream is a long way from being a reality. But right now we've just got lots of disparate solutions that don't speak to each other. Again, this is something that came from the disruptive GC network, looking at what frustrations GCs have. I don't think this is anything new. I think there are frustrations in weighing up the value add of a solution that's being presented to you. There's complexity in actually working out what something does. But I think particularly thinking about how you would actually practically onboard a solution into the business and how successful it would be. Ultimately, no GC wants to make a recommendation to onboard a system and then it's a complete flop or failure and no one adopts it, and it's you've just spent this huge budget on this, or even a small budget on something, and then it's a fail. So I think ultimately you really want to set yourself up for success. And setting up yourself for success means like really picking the right solution that you know is going to actually hit the mark. So these are my 3 tips, my probably personal experience, my 3 tips for pitching legal tech, based on some good ones and some bad ones. So my first tip would be about making it relevant. I have had some pitches to me on solutions that I'm just never, they're just never going to solve the problems that I have. They are perhaps relevant to different types of businesses or even a law firm, not an in-house legal team. So really invest time to understand the problems of the potential client that you're pitching to, and actually use the pitch to gather that intelligence. And it may be that ultimately the ultimate, you realize that what you're offering doesn't solve their problem, but by gathering that intelligence, maybe it will be useful for a different pitch. So don't waste people's time, I think is the key piece. Understand my challenges, my priorities, and my constraints, not necessarily focusing on what you can offer. A lot of, on the second point, a lot of systems are fairly intuitive. I think once you have had a look at something for a few minutes, you get a sense of what it can do. It is not necessarily it's not necessary to demo every single capability and functionality of the solution. You can just give a flavor. So 10-15 minutes I think is fine. It's always better to leave the customer or potential customer wanting more, rather than kind of looking at their watch, waiting for when does the hour end. And then finally, this is something that rarely gets offered in reality, but feeding on the second point, really, what I'd actually prefer to do is rather than have an hour demo of every functionality, just be given some access in a sort of dummy system, if you like, to be able to play around in my own time and actually have a look at how it works. And the number of times I've actually asked for that, and it's computer says no, is really quite frustrating. And I actually think that just giving that alone would make a really big difference to a lot of potential customers. Remember that the customer is not one person, and I think sometimes it's easy to forget that in a sort of sales scenario. Indeed, from the GC's perspective, there are a number of different stakeholders in the decision to onboard tech, and they all have different drivers. The GC, they're probably looking for scale, efficiency, process. That may be looking for some data, some metrics or something, and they're looking for success, perhaps. The legal team may be looking at it from how does this impact me? I'm going to be most impacted by this. Is this worth the effort? Is this actually going to improve my life day to day, or is it actually going to be a drag on my time? And then from the business perspective, if it impacts them because they're going to be dragged into the system, or they're going to have to interact with the system, then they need to buy into that. Or even if it just impacts the way they interact with the legal function, they're a stakeholder in the process. And certainly if there's a budget concern, they're definitely going to be a stakeholder from that perspective. So when you're pitching legal tech to the client or potential client, you've got to be thinking about what's going on in the background, which is that I've got to get all these other stakeholders comfortable with this. It's not just about whether I think it's a good solution or not. I'm just going to be thinking about how do I ensure that adoption is actually successful across the business. And sort of picking up on that, then I think when you're dealing with lawyers, they are definitely a special kind of person. So I picked up this data from a report in 2002, which is about behavioural characteristics of lawyers. Although it's 18 years old, I don't think lawyers have changed all that much.
I'm guessing not.
And lawyers score in the 90th percentile in skepticism and in the 89th percentile in autonomy. And in skepticism, actually, they're the highest scoring group. And so people that score high in skepticism are cynical, judgmental, questioning, self-protective, and argumentative. And those that score high in autonomy prize their independence. They resist being managed and don't like being told what to do. And I know for sure that my husband would definitely identify with both of those. And what this means,
like a missed a career opportunity now.
it's a good excuse when you want to get your own way. So I think from a sort of tech perspective, I think what this means is that lawyers just don't accept things at face value. They tend to be quite questioning. They need to be convinced. And then the autonomy piece is really important from a legal team perspective, because lawyering is actually a process, but the way we perform lawyering as a process is very individualistic. There's no one way of doing lawyering. The way one person will review a contract may look very different to another. The way another person will review a contract, the way people's work style, the way people work is very different. And so when you're trying to onboard technology or trying to embed systems and processes like that can be difficult, because you are essentially forcing people to change behaviors. You're actually forcing them into a process. And that's not to say they're being belligerent, but actually you are trying to drive change of behaviors, and changing behaviors is really difficult. And I do think, picking up on the point at the beginning that we talked about, how ready are lawyers to change? I think history would probably show that lawyers have been slower to change than other groups. So what this means is, when you're trying to adopt a technology, you've got these go through the change model. as I'm sure many of you will have come across before. But to get through that valley of despair, if you like, through those different emotions, I think you need a few different things. You need, when you're kicking off the process, you really need to ensure that there's a joined up recognition of the need to change. So this isn't even about technology. This is about a need to change, do something different. And if you don't have a joined up recognition of that need to change, like, it's just never going to go anywhere. And also a willingness to change. So people need to come together and actually say, like, actually, we need to change, and we want to change. And that's really the starting point. So that's great. Everything gets going, but then it gets actually really hard in reality. That starts being tougher than people think. And it's really easy to kind of get lost in that valley of despair. And what you need to kind of keep punching through that is momentum, commitment, focus, regrouping, perhaps going back and remembering what the need for change was, and the willingness to change, so that you keep moving forward, and keep focusing on your eye on the prize. So having that prize ahead of you is really important. Like, what does good look like on the other side? What's the outcome? What is it you're trying to change for? Like, what's the reason for change? And that might be increased collaboration, efficiency, speed. It may be other things, right? But I think you've also got to have that goal ahead of you in order to drive that change and force your way through the difficult times. So where to start then? I think there are three things. Like, one is having a joined up problem statement. This is from the kind of the customer perspective. If you have an agreed understanding of what the problem is, what it is you're trying to achieve, and why, I think you've got much greater chance of adopting a change in process and adopting a technology. Maybe think about attacking some smaller, simpler problems first that maybe don't require technology at all. So maybe that's about having particularly if you've got a larger team doing things perhaps in a slightly different way, like having a consistent taxonomy, saving things in the same places, maybe pulling all your templates together. There's probably a whole load of templates out there. Maybe pulling together FAQs, and sort of tooling to enable the business to self-serve more. So try and solve those quick wins. And try and do that first before you start kind of going into big bang and focusing on technology. And then before thinking about technology, make sure you've thought about your systems and processes and how these things impact people, and then think about technology. Don't think that technology is going to fix all of those other issues. And that's it.
Super. Thanks very much, James. So one of the things I was going to ask you to think about, James, is about the culture. So I was really interested in the culture thread that runs all the way through the piece there. I think primarily because a lot of the stuff that I've done throughout my career is in change management too, is that sort of Boston box you showed at the bottom left-hand quadrant. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you get people to be happy moving out of that, because a lot of that work that you described as low value, low risk BAU, but significant, is where people tend to go to their happy place. It's where you feel the most useful. It's where people drop by your desk and ask you questions that you can answer because you're dead clever and you've been doing it for a long time. How do you get people to kind of feel comfortable dropping that and moving into the more high value stuff?
Yeah, so I think when you think about like lawyers in the team, they want career development, they want progression, and they want career progression and elevation. And I think you're not going to achieve that through answering the same question over and over again, handling those BAU questions. So I think it comes back to career progression. And I also think that legal teams they want to focus on that really high impact, the type of work that gets in front of the board, the type of work that gets in front of Exco, the stuff that's really kind of meaty and exciting and like intellectually challenging work. I do recognise that there's a familiarity, and it's like that you can be really good at answering all that simple stuff. But like on honesty, certainly the lawyers I've worked with, I think there is that they would love to leave some of that stuff behind. They recognise that it needs to be done. Like, you can't just say, right, well, we're just not going to answer all these questions anymore. We're going to just focus on all the exciting stuff. They recognise that there's a need to service that work. I don't necessarily think that they are like trying to hold on to that type of work. Actually, quite the reverse.
So actually, technology provides an obvious solution for that low value but high frequency work, because even if it was a set of searchable FAQs, that might be better than the constant interruption that you get from the organization to ask stuff which is almost self-evident, but needs a lawyer's opinion.
Well, and more than that, I think a lot of the work that sits in that bottom left quadrant, it's repeat work. It's being asked the same question over and over again, and it might be asked in a slightly different way, and there might be a slight different permutation, but fundamentally, it will be around certain themes that are relevant to your business that kind of come up time and time again. It might be data protection. Typically, a lot of questions come up in that area. You will definitely have themes of questions that are in your business, and then you just like group the FAQ so that you can, and even if it's just a matter of dragging and dropping the answer to the question, or just directing someone to where the answer is, that's at least some level of efficiency. And I think that's the point I'm making, is that you can make small wins with efficiency. You don't have to go like big bang into an automated solution that does it for you. Yeah.
So, Chris, I think you've got a question as well. But before we get into your question, Chris, I'm just interested to see what people are saying to the poll. So, Chris, if you could display the answers to our poll question, that would be great. So the question was, now I've seen Monzo's tech stack, I am feeling. Ooh, very interesting. So just nudging it is that reassured, we've got most of this too. A surprise there, James, that people thought that Monzo would have more in their legal tech stack. And I'm feeling that the people who answered question 2 might work in private practice.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, when I saw the questions, I was going to be interested to see what the answer would be, but I'm not entirely surprised. I do think that we've got more to do for sure. We're on a journey, but we don't have all the bells and whistles for sure.
One thing that I often get asked, and one that I talk about, is just the challenge that there is between the relationship between lawyers and technology. It's a bit of a tense one. Your views and your thoughts always welcomed on how do we actually bring harmony to that relationship?
Yeah, so I genuinely think that there is a willingness to adopt technology. I really do, and I've spoken to a lot of lawyers and GCs in about that over the last 12 to 18 months. I definitely think that there is that harmony. I think what the gap is just that uncertainty as to what's out there, and like which solution do I, even if I get to the point where I'm ready to adopt a solution, which is the right solution. And there is, from people I've spoken to, there is this concern of like, I don't want to pick the wrong solution, and I don't want to pick a solution when there's another better solution 6 months later. So and there's a knowledge gap for a lot of GCs, even the most tech savvy and working in tech companies. They aren't technologists necessarily. They might be tech savvy in the sort of loosest sense of the word, but they won't necessarily know like how an API works if they're building that. They won't necessarily feel comfortable to ask all of the right questions, and that's fine if you've got someone to come along with you on the journey and sort of partner with you in these meetings and ask the right questions. But maybe not everybody has that. But I actually think there is harmony. It's a knowledge gap, and that's not being disparaging on lawyers. I think lawyers aren't trained in these areas, and some lawyers I've dealt with are like super savvy, and that's great. But I do think they're the minority, to be honest.
Is there something in there, and you picked up in a couple of bits there, and there's a strand in it that we need to accept that there is a continual change. I mean, we talk about not making a decision because you're worried that software is going to go out of date. That is what's going to happen. The software is going to go out of date, but they're going to make a new release. And at some point, you're going to have to dip into that valley of despair once again. But maybe each time you do go into that valley, it's maybe going to be a little less deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that once you've got a system in place and you've got like new team members coming in, like when they join, that is the way the business works, and so they'll adopt that. I think it's much harder if you're already working in a way in a business, and then you're kind of forcing people to adopt. And I know it's quite an aggressive word, forcing, but it does feel a bit like that. So I think emotional perspective. If you've got people kind of for the first time having to adopt a technology, that's tough. But the general evolution, I would agree. I think you can continuously improve something, and it's not seen as painful. It's that sharp shock that you get when you're actually suddenly gone from doing something and saving things in your own little way to being forced to go through, like work through a workflow platform.
Yeah, completely, and getting that just ability to welcome that change journey and be part of that change journey and accept it as being part of life, I think will really help. Martin, do you want to have a look at the VVox questions?
Yeah. So thanks very much to everybody who's been posing questions and upvoting our questions. I think the question which is the most popular, James, is what are the typical KPIs for an in-house legal function?
So I think you need to think about what are the legal risks that you're responsible for in your business. So I don't think there's one size fits all. Certainly from a legal risk perspective, I think you can kind of bucket it into things like contract enforceability, etc., and then build up KPIs that are around these themes. It's a bit of a woolly answer, but I think it kind of it depends on your business priorities. But KPIs might be like minimizing litigation, like claims against you. It might be ensuring that you've got like KPIs around turnaround in contracts. But the problem with having some of these KPIs is that there isn't one size fits all. So having a KPI around how quickly you turn around a contract, like it depends on the scale of the contract, the size of the contract, and the complexity. So I think if you start from having parameters for different types of contracts and then turnaround times for those, that's a KPI. It's a bit like an SLA, I think.
Yep. Essentially. Yeah, there are a couple of questions which are in here that have got a bit of a theme to them. One of the ones that people are really interested in, it would appear, is what is the one piece of legal tech that has had the most obvious transformative effect on how the legal team operates and why? So I suppose that goes back a little bit to the cultural piece we were talking about, getting people in the habit of using legal tech. But has there been something which has been particularly transformative? Doesn't necessarily need to be at Monzo, James. Just in terms of your experience, is there one particular, even if it's not a brand, it's a capability that tech has transformed?
So, like not speaking from Monzo, but I do think matter management is really important. And I think the reason why matter management is really important is it creates a huge amount of visibility, not only from the GC's perspective, but also the business's perspective, and also individual team members' perspective, because you can then suddenly see what the whole team is working on. So I actually do think that is the most important solution that has been a game changer. And if you can adopt that and you can create ticketing into that system, like it's impacting the workflow into the team, it's creating visibility and allocation of work within the team, and then you can start measuring things. So you can then start measuring the time it takes from something coming in to something that's coming out, and you can start measuring how many of a specific type of request is coming in. You can start measuring that repetition piece as well. Like, actually, we get asked the same question every time, or we have this really technical area we're being asked about. Actually, this is a reason to start to think about whether we actually need capability within the team that we don't already have.
This is a very slight segue, and it's not one of the questions that's come through on VVox, but it occurred to me when you were talking about selling legal tech into a company. So this is a reflection of a couple of conversations we've had at our LawTech Bridge event in Notting Hill Gate with regard to how small tech companies can better understand the way that law is practiced and administered, whether it be for a GC or in a private practice. So one of the things you talked about is that smaller vendors in particular don't really understand what the jobs to be done are at a law firm or for a GC. How do you think that those small companies can get better access to, not necessarily to the law, the big building block, because lots of them are understanding that, because many of them come from a law background. But that piece that you talked about was about nuance and how GCs and lawyers do jobs in different ways. How can a small company get to grips with what the specific jobs to be done are in a company either like yours or like Chris's?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, I think in a way you need to give to get back. And so I see some providers working in the space where they're actually giving things away, whether it's writing books around, you know, how to, if you're a GC joining a tech company, I know, like, I'll call out a specific supplier. Duro have a really awesome book that they produce around that. So they're giving things away, and actually by giving things away, they're actually learning a lot about each of the businesses that are contributors to that book. And I've seen other tech companies do that as well. So give and you shall receive, I think is my tip.
So one of my colleagues calls that sales as market research.
Yeah, like gathering intel, right? Because even if that you're not going to be able to sell. Like, don't waste the time. Like, use the time to actually gather intelligence. I have had examples where I've identified something isn't going to be right, but it's almost as though as soon as the salesperson realizes that it's not going to go any further, it's like, all right, end of session, which is fine, like, time back in the diary. But actually, you could still actually use that time to network a bit and understand a bit more about, like, well, actually, what is relevant and actually what would be useful. And sometimes you don't always get that line of questioning.
That kind of leads us to one of the questions that's come through as well, that I'm interested to know the kind of thought about, and it's that difference between the software that we're seeing coming through from the vendors themselves. So obviously, where there is that gap in terms of understanding, or that software that's either coming through from a law firm, be it proprietary, or them representing somebody else's technology. Is there a preference which is more attractive to you, hearing from the law firm or from the vendor direct?
Yeah, that's interesting, because we definitely looked at both. I think in some respects, I think law firms probably just have maybe a better inside track into the problems their in-house teams are trying to solve. And so, yeah, I mean, I've definitely had pitches from law firms pitching technology that they partnered with, external developers. Yeah. And we've looked at that, and it's been great. And maybe it's been sort of shaped in a certain way that where the law firm thinks it actually should be configured a certain way for the client, and then perhaps you can buy the same solution or the same technology with the developer, but like direct with the developer. Yeah. It looks and feels a bit different. I wouldn't say one is necessarily better than the other, but I probably would say that law firms have a better inside track into the problems that in-house teams are trying to solve and some of the challenges they've got. So yeah, I think that's probably going to mean that they have a head start.
Yeah.
And one of the things that keeps coming up, the question I'm not going to ask is, should lawyers learn to code, James? Because I think that we've had lots of different answers. But this is a flavour on personal development. Do you encourage tech and product learning as part of your continued personal development program for your team? And have any of the team members come from disciplines which are outside of law?
Yes. So in the legal team at Monzo, we have people that are trained in law and people that are trained in other disciplines, and have got, whether they're working in supplier operations or company secretariat. So I think what makes the team really effective is just that blend of skills, rather than everyone having sort of thinking and approaching things the same way. And certainly on the technology side, I think the technology skills might sit like better in the people that are not legally trained, actually, in all honesty. And just to have that blend of experience and skills within the team, I think makes the team much stronger as a result. I wouldn't say that, and I've never been asked ever for more training in technology or coding. I think, honestly, I think people struggle to. This is not a Monzo thing. I think it's just a general theme for lawyers, that people struggle to keep up with the day-to-day. Like, development always comes secondary, and then when they're focusing on development, they're focusing on softer skills, or they're focusing on some hard legal skills. I don't think necessarily technology is yet, anyway, seen as one of those must-have softer skills.
So it's an interesting point, because I watched the Legal Geek webinar, as I'm sure many people who are on the webinar just now did. And one of the things that Mark Cohen in particular talks about is the future lawyer being somebody who's got both skills from a legal qualification perspective and a legal administrative perspective. But the thing I think he calls a super lawyer is somebody who also has great depth of skill in the world of technology. Do you think that so I think what you've talked about in Monzo is a natural working team with people who have got very specific skills and a blended approach, which is the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. If you project forward, do you think that super lawyer premise holds true?
I don't, actually. I think having what I call an operations mindset, yeah, I do think that. So thinking in terms of process, and being able to see legal as a process, not as something that is special and that can be done in an individualistic way, and trying to think about how you systemize and standardize the way the team and legal services are delivered to the business. I think that's important. But being a technologist, if you like maybe in 20 years, but I don't think it's going to be in 10 years, for example.
I think that's a really valid point in there, and there's a piece of just making sure that you've got the people with the right skills around you, and that's what we're seeing more and more of across certainly within the ecosystem we've got around the lab, is the people that are coming through the door. It's not all just lawyers now that are coming in to talk about innovation or technology. It's the people that are really geared up at doing that moving in from other industries and sharing that knowledge, which is it's finding that middle ground then where everybody's got enough knowledge to be able to progress it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why you're seeing people doing legal operations roles and legal teams bringing legal operations managers and specialists, because actually then it becomes, you've got someone that's specialized in that area. And also it's someone's actual job. So they're not fitting it in on the side of their desk when they've got the time. It's actually someone that's actually got some specific objectives to kind of achieve certain outcomes, and they can drive that journey for the team. And the team are almost supporting that, but you've got someone that owns it.
I think one question, then we'll go to our final poll, James. So this is, again, something which is particularly pertinent to the world that we're living in right just now. How do you think COVID-19 will impact the appetite for spend on legal tech and digital transformation within the legal function? Will legal tech be considered as an indulgence, or will we see a energized push for digital transformation? I think that's particularly interesting from the perspective of a company that is digital first, a digital native company, because again, I think that this whole idea that people like you and in-house and GCs are already working in companies that recognize the need for digital transformation. But what are your thoughts about that whole thing about is now I think what people are talking about as an inflection point in terms of digital coming into law?
Yeah, I certainly see so when I look at Monzo, we're already a very agile workforce as well. So the ability our ability to switch to home working was really, really easy, frankly, and it was something that was overnight. So, and the tools that we have already make communication very easy, even when we're remote. But I'm kind of thinking outside of Monzo. I think for sure if there is generally a move towards remote first as a way of working, or just increased remote working, having technology which brings people together, I think, is critically important. And I suppose being in a business where all those tools are already there, it's easy for me to forget that, but I definitely think that is a need to have. But whether that is an inflection point and has a massive turning point for technology, I don't know. I still think it will be. I think it'll be slow still, but I do think that there is at least a use case for why matter management, workflow, those sorts of systems would be useful. But I don't think, for example, that's going to have an impact on e-discovery and AI tooling, for example.
So I think it goes back to that jobs to be done piece, doesn't it? Which is that perhaps people are thinking about it in a different context now, but fundamentally it still comes back to what are the jobs that you need to have to be done in your organization. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's prioritization. There's, as I said, there's 8 different types of technology. Realistically, you may choose 2 or 3 of them, and you're doing really, really well. In my view, you've got 2 or 3 of them, and the ones that you're going to be selecting are going to be the ones that make most impact. And for me, that's definitely not knowledge management, matter management, maybe cost management, but even that's, I think, a bit marginal.
James, what we'll do here is we'll have a look at the poll as a group. It's easier for in-house lawyers and GCs to influence change and adopt LawTech than it is for lawyers in private practice. True, false, or don't know. I think once we got the results of those polls in, we can probably react to that from your own perspective. So maybe so people agree. That's handy. So people agree that it's easy for in-house and GCs to influence change about LawTech adoption. And a good few people don't know, so that's fair. What's your thoughts on that, James? Would you agree, based on your career experience, that it's easier for GCs to influence change than it is for people in private practice? And maybe give a couple of reasons as to why you think that is.
Yeah, I would think that, but I think it's a completely different stakeholder model. So within a tech company as a GC, or like GC within a company, you've probably got a smaller number of stakeholders to satisfy, and you've got a legal team which is probably going to be smaller than the law firm. Obviously, it does depend on the size of the law firm, but if you're thinking in terms of big law, you've got to completely change a number of different stakeholders across the business. You've got a partnership model, which I think makes sometimes like change around technology slower and more difficult. And so I just think it's like comparing apples and pears, and that's why I think it's not a surprise that's the answer. I would absolutely hope that's the answer. I'd have been shocked if it was the other way around.
Well, what about you, Chris? From your perspective, I mean, you see a lot of this out there. You speak to people from both sides of the law equation, from private practice and from in-house.
Yeah, and look, I think that there is more of an appetite and a willingness in-house to do change, but then we have got the challenge of certainly within the larger organisation where it comes to that cost point becomes a real challenge, because we're not at the top of the list when it comes to funding technology and advancement, particularly within the bank. There's many other areas that there's a bigger return on investing. So that's where our challenge comes, but we are able to drive that tech agenda and drive it quite hard. But I think the important piece for us is what we've started to develop over the last couple of years is really partnering with our law firms as well to help to drive that agenda forward as well. So doing a bit more to collaborate, to think about the technology that we could be using, or the solutions that we need to bring, and the problems that we've got to deal with is what our focus starts to be on. I think it's an important one to take it from actually us as consumers of legal services. We collectively should be coming together to also start to really refine down those problems, because there is a finite amount of money that's in there, and we've got a finite amount of time to be able to develop it. And going back to what James was saying earlier, there's plenty of technology that is out there, there's plenty of potential solutions on the table, but does everybody really understand the problem? If we can collectively articulate the problem, and we can really then also help to inform what those solutions look like, we can accelerate that whole process around developing technology that works and that can immediately fit in. But it's essential that we bring together that cohort across the ecosystem and the legal industry to drive that forward a little bit and save us all a bit of time.
Absolutely.
So we're coming to the end of our morning. James, thanks very much. I hope the hour has passed quickly for you. I had a lot of fun chatting.
Yeah, thanks. It's been awesome. Thank you.
So Chris, I think that in terms of from our program, I'm going to relentlessly plug the stuff that we do. So we're continuing our webinar series through the summer with more people like James coming to offer their opinions about the world of LawTech. We also have a newsletter which everybody should sign up to because it's excellent. And we're having a coffee morning in a couple of weeks' time, which brings together in a more informal way lots of the people who will be sitting watching this on the webinar for coffee and a chat before work. I think the next one's a week on Tuesday. Chris, I think there's an outro piece that you need to remind everybody of before we say goodbye.
Yes. And then look, echoing yours, we as many of you want that we love having these sessions and want to do as many of them as we possibly can. So feedback on what you'd also like to hear about. I know that there was a link posted into Vvox, so if you want to follow that, give us feedback on today's session and also thoughts on what you might like to hear, please do reach out to any one of us. We're all on LinkedIn. But yes, there is just a final little piece around there. Again, I'm just going to remind you, this is just thoughts, conversations and dialogue, and it's intended to help you with your own independent research. All of your businesses are very unique, and you should think about how any of what we've said could apply, because it may not all be relevant to you. But thank you once again for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.